Hi everyone. I thought that I'd do something a little bit different today, and this is something that I've not actually seen too many, if any, other creators do on YouTube. Now, it's been quite a long time since I started making these videos, and quite a lot has changed about me, well, physically, over the last couple of years, and I hope that you can tell the difference between me now and me then. And I also wonder if anything's changed for me psychologically. Several weeks or months ago, I made a video where we looked at a journal that I created right at the start of my transitioning, and I thought it might be interesting for me to go back and rewatch one of my videos that I made in the past and see if it still rings true for me today. Now, when trying to decide which video I would go for me it was quite an easy decision. I have one which is by far the most watched video on my channel. It has almost double the number of views as any other video that I've put out. So I thought, well, this is probably as good a video as any for me to revisit. Seeing as it seems to be continuously attracting some attention, like it seems to be getting views quite consistently, maybe it's a good idea for me to go back to it and just check in and see, does it still hold true? Is there anything in that video that I don't necessarily agree with anymore? And maybe I need to do a update to that video. Let's see. This is actually the first time that I've rewatched it probably for quite some time. I originally released this video on June the 6th, 2024, which is basically 2 whole years ago. I think it's probably time for me to check in and see if I still feel that way. Okay, so first impressions. I look really different. I look so different. It's amazing just seeing the changes to my facial structure, but you can see the effect that laser has had on the hair around my face as well. That's crazy. It's almost like I'm looking at a brother or something like that. It's crazy. Anyway, so let's continue.
Okay, so we're going to start with a little story in this video, a little tale, a dilemma, if you...
Oh, I remember this story. I might skip past it.
It occurs to me that when you go out in public, your appearance, it's a conversation almost between you and the people around you. It's not a verbal conversation, it's a non-verbal conversation. The clothes you wear, your appearance, it's making a statement. And the statement that you make, it's telling a story, it's addressing the world about who you are and how you want to be seen and how you want to be interacted with. Maybe sometimes you need to be aware that how you look is going to generate a certain type of response from the people around you.
That's really interesting, and it's something that I still feel is true today. I'm kind of curious because I can't remember exactly where I go next with this point that I'm about to make. I'm sure it's going to be very interesting, and I think it's true. I certainly have always believed that your appearance, the way that you put yourself together, your clothing, it is telling that story. Because of course I'm talking about passing in this video, and obviously so much of that is tied into how one puts oneself together. And as I say, it's kind of interesting to note that my appearance just facially has changed quite significantly, I would say, from then to now. And I think the way that the world perceives me now is much different to the way that the world perceived me then. Back then, I was still getting a few sort of odd looks from passers-by on the street. I was still getting noticed, let's say. And these days, although I can't say for sure what my status is in terms of passing or not passing, I certainly feel that I get gendered correctly by strangers much more regularly. Yes, I do still agree with the fact that the appearance that you put out to the world tells a story, tells a narrative, and affects the way that people perceive you.
Which brings me to today's topic, passing. what is passing when it comes to the world of transgender people? What does it mean? Why is it important? Why is it a controversial topic? I'm going to give you a definition of what passing means from an article that I read on this topic. And the definition that they gave is passing means is where a transgender person is perceived to be cisgender. So why is this so important? What does this mean for trans people? Well,
I'm going to stop myself there because that's interesting that that's the definition that I go by. My own personal interpretation of passing has evolved, has changed. It's not for me about being perceived as a cis person, it's just being perceived as a woman in my case. And whether or not people perceive me as a trans or a cis woman doesn't really make any difference to me. I mean, I don't know. This is the thing. I don't know what goes on in other people's minds. I can't say for sure. But I do know that sometimes people perceive me as something other than cis, which is fine. But they still refer to me by the pronouns that I use. So am I passing as a cis woman in those instances? No. But I'm still passing as a woman, in that case, a trans woman. And for me, it doesn't really make any difference right now because ultimately the end result is the same, basically. I'm treated as a woman. I mean, I'm using pronouns as kind of shorthand for everything else that goes along with that way that people treat me. It goes beyond pronouns, of course, and it touches on so many other facets of social interaction. But for me, passing, it doesn't matter if it's about being seen as cis or trans, because that doesn't really mean anything to me these days.
I think if you spend any time in trans spaces online or wherever, the idea of passing comes up quite a lot. I mean, I could put millions of Reddit posts, for example, all on the topic of passing. And why is it so important? I think for a lot of trans people, it taps into that notion of safety. That impact that I was talking about earlier, that effect that you have on the world around you when you step outside of the door, that conversation that you're having with people, you don't want to be conversing as a trans person. You want to be conversing as the gender that you wish to be perceived as. So therefore, passing, it can be about safety, yes, but it can also be about wanting to be perceived and interacted with in the way that you wish to, according to that particular gender that you're trying to express. So therefore, passing is really quite important to a lot of trans people. So what's the controversy about this? Why is...
Okay, although I don't necessarily say if that's something that I tend to agree with there and then, I'm kind of putting it in the mouths of other trans people. I think, it's interesting that I make that point. I mean, I'm also talking about safety. And what is interesting is that I have not felt unsafe in any spaces that I've been to yet. But I am going to the UK in 5 weeks' time, so we'll see if that changes anything. But yeah, it's interesting how I'm sort of framing this. Let's continue and see where I go with this.
Is this such a controversial topic? The issue is, because it's seen as being so important, people can become quite obsessed with it, and it can become quite a toxic kind of mindset. I mean, I look at myself and I can see the progress that I've made from day one of transitioning and today, and I can see that I probably don't pass. And actually, the reason why I'm making this video is because a lot of my wonderful commenters quite happily point that out on a video to video basis, and thank you very much. I did not realise how I look. I would never have realised unless you pointed it out in the comments section. So thank you for awakening me to reality, the cold hard truths of the YouTube comment section. You're so kind. Thank you.
Ha ha ha. One thing that I've had to become or learn is resilience. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think I wouldn't have started transitioning if I didn't feel confident in my ability to deal with the brickbats and criticisms. And I think it's quite telling that even relatively early on in my transition, I learned how to kind of allow those sorts of comments to flow off of my back somewhat. So, it's quite quite nice to see how I felt back then.
So this toxic mentality is discussed in this article and elsewhere. I mean, whenever you go into these discussions, a lot of the time on places like Reddit, there is this conversation, this dialogue, and I think a lot of trans people are quite wary of getting too obsessed about passing, because it does lead to an over focus, a hyper focusing on certain features of your appearance to the detriment of your mental health. I could look at certain parts of my face and I can think, well, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this. But would this actually help me with passing? At the end of the day, I'm not sure, because the more obsessed I get with changing certain features, maybe I'll go and get surgery and all of these things, but even that wouldn't necessarily guarantee that I would pass. A lot of people emphasize more things like your posture and the way that you speak and carry yourself. It's the non-verbal signals that actually help you to pass, rather than the actual physical nuts and bolts. And I'd like to believe that's true, because that feels like something that I'm going to have a bit more control over. I mean, I'm incredibly tall. I'm over 6 foot tall, so there's no way that I'm going to be able to be like your average height of a woman. But that being said, there's loads of examples of women who are over 6 foot and they are passing all the time because they are cis women. So who's to say that I can't? And it's not...
That's an interesting point I just made, because I since then have found a subreddit dedicated to tall girls, and this is a cis, I think, mainly subreddit, and in there they talk about issues that they've had with being perceived as trans and how they've had to deal with the possibility of being transvestigated where they're not obviously trans, but people have perceived them as such. So whether they pass or not as cis women all the time is interesting, and I don't think I talk about this here because in a way this whole concept of passing versus not passing feels incredibly binary, and that once you've attained this status of passability, it's something that is almost sort of permanently bestowed upon you, and it's something that you always have ownership of. But I don't think that's true. In a lot of the spaces that I've been to, say in Morocco, I didn't pass all the time. And I think a lot of it's dependent on things completely outside of my control. So ultimately, that's another reason why I think this conversation about passing and not passing, it's kind of destructive. Anyway, let's continue listening to what I have to say.
Just sort of individual toxicity that creates this friction in trans communities, but there is also perhaps this tendency towards sort of self-policing almost, and you can see, especially on places like 4chan or somewhere like that, where you get this kind of horde mentality of trans women dunking on each other and telling them how they won't pass and how awful they'll look, and they'll focus in on those insecurities of those people that go to those spaces, and it's almost like a self-flagellative experience where you would go to, I don't know, to really wallow in that sort of misery and self-pity.
Yes. And it still continues to this day, and I spend a lot of time on Reddit, and there are various spaces where people go, and it's just an awful time for everybody.
I'm just going to jump in here. This is Andy from the future, from that recording anyway. I recorded that video before my last one was released, and the last video received a lot of comments, and I think I've had more negative comments in the last week than I think I might have had in total, well, for the last 30 years at least, that's for sure. It's been quite interesting, and I still maintain that it hasn't upset me, but it has made me think. And I do wonder if maybe some of these people have a point, because a lot of them seem to be suggesting that I'm not making enough of an effort. You know, I'm not wearing makeup, for example, or yes, I do need to get laser for my facial hair. I concede that, and it made me wonder, well, maybe I could be making more of an effort to communicate my femininity to the world. Maybe because I'm not making enough of an effort, that seems to be one of the causes for upsetting people. But it was interesting as well, because through that week, as I was looking and monitoring and deleting these comments, there was some part of me that appreciated them. It made me think, well, maybe by being exposed to the worst that humanity has to offer, am I resilient enough to get past this? And yes, I think I find myself at the moment able to do so. I think if things escalated further, then maybe, I don't know. And also, I think there's a certain degree of, is this what the world is really thinking when their mask is off? Is this honesty? Is this what people are actually thinking behind closed doors? And I don't want to believe that. I want to believe that the people that I've spoken to and are, super supportive, all of those people, that they are being honest. And I think they are. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be. But they represent a fairly narrow segment of society. So for the broader, wider range of people, is that what they're thinking? I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure if they'd be thinking anything at all, but at the same time, it's like there is this kind of thought process, and it's interesting how this started to emerge after this week. So yeah, anyway, maybe I'll start wearing makeup, I don't know, but let's put it this way, if I do so, it's for me, and it's for my own happiness. It's not because of something that somebody said to me in my comment section.
Okay, so that's all really interesting. I have to say, I completely forgot about a lot of the earlier feedback that I would receive on my channel. And it's interesting that I've noted on several occasions that I'm getting much, much fewer views these days than I was back then. And with that has come a lot fewer newer people coming onto my channel. I think a lot of the people that tend to write comments in my comment section are my hardcore regulars who I am incredibly amazed by, but also grateful for. You guys have kind of like followed me almost from this period up to where I am today, and I'm curious to see what you think in terms of my own presentation and my own perspective since then, if you could remember from like 2 years ago, if you haven't followed me for that long. But anyway, it's interesting that I note here that I'm talking about resilience because that's something I mentioned myself just a few moments ago, but also how I felt about those comments. Another thing that I haven't mentioned is my voice. I've made a bit of a conscious effort to try to modulate my voice a little bit. I don't think it passes particularly well still, but like in this video in particular, I noticed that it is very masculine. I'm not making any effort. I don't wear makeup. I haven't really done anything with my hair. In this portion of the video, my outfit is an unironed top, which is a bit of an interesting choice, I have to say. I still do have this top. I haven't worn it for ages though. I do make a much greater effort with my appearance these days, and it is mainly because it makes me feel better. But it makes me feel better, I think, because of that kind of feedback loop where, because of how you present yourself, that gets fed back to you by other people. You know what I mean? So while yes, you should always be dressing for yourself and being invested in how you look for your own sake rather than for anybody else's, it's also absolutely true that positivity, especially in terms of your appearance, is a feedback loop. If you look good, people are going to respond positively to you rather than if you don't look good. It's one of the greatest issues when it comes to beauty standards. Some people don't have the privileges that beautiful, stunning, gorgeous people have, and so therefore they are treated much worse. This is not, I don't think, a controversial point. And I think while on the one hand, I have taken to makeup because it makes me feel good, I think it also makes me feel good because people would respond more positively to it, quite frankly. So am I a hypocrite for doing so? Have I gone against what I said, the reasons why I said that I would wear makeup? I don't think so, but I don't know. Anyway, so let's continue, see what I say in the next portion of this video.
So what about me? What's my perspective on the take of passing? Well, I'd like to think that in a few years' time, when everything that I'm doing will start to bear more concrete fruit, the laser therapy and voice training and everything else that goes alongside the hormone therapy, I'll be able to leave the flat and go about my day, and people will perceive me as a woman because that's how I perceive myself.
And it's so gratifying to say that that's kind of been the case. But anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt.
When I'm making these videos, perhaps in a couple of years' time, I'll see fewer comments accusing me of looking like a man.
And again, and it's hard to say if that's because of the types of people that have come onto my channel, that view these videos, that make those comments. But I get very few mentions about me not passing on my channel these days. But that said, that's not universally true. I still get some people saying otherwise.
I don't know. I don't know, because there are no guarantees about how this will go. And honestly, I've made peace with that, because there are certain factors, there are certain things that I think will always be true. I'll always be tall. I'll probably always have this nose. There are certain things which just probably won't change. So if I don't end up passing always and constantly, I'm just going to have to accept that. But also,
I'll just stop myself there. And I think that was the realization that I came to that allowed me to start transitioning. I think if I'd been scared of never getting to the stage where I am today, then I would be stuck always living in the closet, essentially. And I'm going to mention my perceived privilege in the fact that I am here, and I do feel I look quite okay. But I have put in a lot of work, and I do think that's worth recognizing. I reference some of the things here in this video, and it's taken a lot of work, a lot of effort, and I think, I'm not sure if I'm going to mention it here in this video or not, but it was quite frustrating when people were coming into my channel and talking about me not making any effort, because it felt incredibly unfair. While you might not be able to see the fruits of a lot of that effort here on screen, the reality is, like, this video is the product of decades of work. But much of that is invisible and internal. It's about the work that it took to go from being in a position of denial, repression, guilt, shame, unhappiness, to acceptance, and then being able to share that with the world. That alone is worthy of so much celebration. To just deny all of that and say, well, you haven't done any work, it's just unfair. Anyway, let's continue.
So on top of that, I think there's a power in being visibly trans out in the streets. I see trans people out all the time at the shops, on the train, just going around living their lives, and it really gives me a sense of empowerment. Even before I'd started this, even before I'd even acknowledged to myself that I was trans, occasionally I would see somebody and it would give me a certain thrill of knowing that there were people like me out in the world, and that maybe that there's a future for me, and I wouldn't have to stay closeted forever. It really was quite validating. So if I can be that person, if I can be that example to other trans folk, then that would really be quite something.
Yeah. I still do believe that there is this power. You can make an impact on other people just purely by existing. And as I say, I don't think I don't know if I pass all the time. I don't think I do. And so maybe as I live in this zone of ambiguity, as I still feel I still do have that potency. But as my progress creeps slower and slower towards more, I guess, cis-presenting, am I satisfied in losing that? I don't know. I guess if I get to the point where I'm 100% passing, that's a discussion I would need to be having with myself then. maybe it's a question of like using other symbols, other things that I can kind of demonstrate my transness. But I don't think it's ever anything that I would ever want to hide about myself, even to the point where it might get me into some kind of trouble. Again, I've made peace with this. Anyway, let's continue.
And also, I just want to talk a little bit about like all of the toxic comments that I'm getting in the comment section. I've kind of referred to them already, and I just want to address those people directly. I just want you to know that I don't care what you have to say about me and my appearance. As I say, I can see the progress that I'm making on a monthly, weekly basis, and I'm actually quite pleased with the results so far. I'm not close to where I think I'm going to end up. I know that there's still going to be a lot of time before I present as female as perhaps you would like. But I'm fine with this. I knew that when I was going to make these videos that I'm not going to look like your typical woman. That's fine. I think there's a power as well in what I'm doing if I can sort of blow my own trumpet. You see very few people like myself early in transition willing to go out into the world, put myself out there or put themselves out there and show the face of transitional trans people, because this is the reality. We don't just come out fully formed as a ContraPoints or as a philosophy tube. I love their content. I love what they have to say. I think that they are an essential voice of transgender power on this platform, and I really, really respect and admire everything that they have to say. But Philosophy Tube basically snapped her fingers and was a woman, a very beautiful and amazing looking woman, right from the moment she came out. I'm not doing that, and I'm not doing that consciously. I started making these videos for myself to sort of track my progress over time, and I'm now getting 1,000+ views. I don't mind the comments. I don't mind the negativity. It was inevitable if ever I think I recognized that if ever I got noticed, I think it was inevitable that people were going to pick up on it, and it's like, you know what? I don't care.
I completely agree with everything I said. I completely agree. 2 years later, I still contend that it's necessary. We aren't allowed to show that transitional process. We aren't allowed to be non-passing in society. We have to be cis-passing trans people from day one in order to get any level of recognition and respect. Jesus, there's people talking very loudly outside my window. 1 second. Oh, it's my crazy neighbor. I was accused of being brave. I always use the verb accuse when I talk about this, and I think sometimes I overlook that I put myself out there from almost the first day of when I started taking hormones. That's incredibly brave. It really is. So few people will allow themselves to do that. I see so many people, again, on Reddit talking about how, they're going to boy mode, they're going to stay sort of hidden away until they reach a kind of tipping point where they feel they will pass well enough in order to get by in society. But I kind of went in like a Vinnie Jones 2-foot challenge and just took on the world, and that's just crazy, so crazy. I think we need to see more of those faces. We really do, and by we I mean everybody, because I think we all need to see how we make that progress over time, because trans people need to see that. They need to feel seen in those early stages, and I think society and culture as a whole needs to see where we start, that early stage, that mid stage, years down the line, so that they can track that progress too. They can see that we're not ever those caricatures that they will depict us as, And I think showing that progress is one way to demonstrate that.
What I do care about, however, is if and when I go outside presenting in this way, will I run into danger? Will I face risk in doing this? And I probably will. That being said, I might not. And I'm in work, for example, everyone's super accepting. On the streets, I don't know. I think most people are just going to want to get on with their lives. Yeah, danger's a risk that I'll just have to take.
I have not got into a single scrape issue. And long may that continue. We'll see. I guess I'm still in the same kind of place where on the one hand, I hope that nothing will happen, but I mean, ultimately, who knows? Anyway, let's finish this video off, shall we?
Anyway, so thank you very much for watching. I hope that this has provided a...
Okay, so that's just the end. Okay, so that was actually really quite interesting. What's most notable, I think, about rewatching that video is less that I have changed psychologically. I think I still tend to agree with the majority of what I was saying in that video. I still feel that passing in general is a complex topic, let's say. I think that it's something that we can use as a stick to beat ourselves with. It's something that we can't just use it as the be-all and end-all of the trans experience. But that being said, as you can see, I make much more of an effort about how I look. And I think the way that I've come to understand that feedback loop between the way I present and the way that people respond to me has changed. Maybe I was a bit sort of dismissive of people's feedback and input. Maybe I was a bit sort of blasé about that because maybe I was like, well, you know, take me or leave me. I don't need to change for you. But in a way I did, because if I wanted people to react to me in a certain way, I guess ultimately I did need to change. I don't know. Anyway, so I really enjoyed this, and maybe I'll do something similar to this again at some point in the future. It's quite nice to see that progress that I've made. It's quite interesting to see just how little I've changed psychologically. But what do you think? I don't know. I mean, do you think that I'm still wrong or right in any respect? Do you think I'm a massive hypocrite because now I've started wearing makeup? I don't know. What do you think? Anyway, do let me know in the comments section down below, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Take care. All the best. Goodbye.